Welcome to Change Every Day. I'm Shumita Basu. And tonight is the first in a series of events that we're going to host here in the Greene Space in partnership with Echoing Green, where we'll talk about how your day-to-day choices can work toward achieving bigger, loftier, transformational kind of goals. So we actually have 4 events planned. In fact, next week on Thursday, we'll be talking to a panel of fellows who are designing apps that allow people to act collectively for the better. So that means everything from documenting police interactions to providing language translation services for refugees. It's called Apps That Save Lives. So that's next Thursday. But tonight's panel is called Eat Your Values. We're talking about food, how we produce it, what happens as a result of making it. Can I see a show of hands here, actually? How many people here are on the production end of the food system? Any farmers in the room today? One hand? Anyone on the distribution end of the food system in the room? Does anyone consume food at any point, anytime during the day? Okay, almost everyone. That's great. So you are all involved in the food system, no matter how deeply you've thought about it up until this moment. Now, our 3 guests tonight are all Echoing Green Fellows. They work independently, but each have founded organizations that address inequity, waste, and injustice in the food system. And as you're listening to this conversation, I want you to think about the day-to-day decisions that you can make that could possibly lessen your overall negative impact on the food system. So just keep that thought in the back of your mind. We're going to talk about it at the end all together. But for now, let's get to our panelists. Why don't you come on out? Yeah, you can applaud for them. Don't let the silence be awkward. Come on out, everyone. Okay, I'll introduce you very, very briefly, but then I really want you all to talk about yourselves. So let's start with Sara Day Evans, all the way at the end, founding director of Accelerating Appalachia. Rachel Armstrong is the founder and executive director of Farm Commons, and Jeffrey Neal is the founder of Loop Closing. Welcome, you 3. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I want everyone to know more about your work, so Rachel, why don't you start, because you're in the middle, and no one expects it when they're in the middle. You come from a family of farmers, multiple generations of farmers. Tell us about what Farm Commons is and does.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up on the land that my father farmed and his father before him in a tiny little non-town, because it's unincorporated, called Twig, which is kind of adorable.
How's that spelled? 2 G's? 1 G?
Twig. Twig. So outside of Duluth, Minnesota, far northern Minnesota, very cold. So farming has always been in my blood. It's always been what I loved, and I was looking for my niche in what was I going to do for agriculture. This I admit I did not think about this very hard, but I looked around and was like, we don't have access to any legal resources. We certainly don't pay attorneys. We don't have the money. So I think I'll go to law school and I'll find some way to fix that. So, bright idea. Then I found myself in law school, and word got around that Rachel, this gal who knows something about farming, is going to go to law school. So the phone starts ringing. I get a call one day, and I have a guy on the other line. He had been raising money to start his own farm. So he had $30,000 worth of garlic in the ground. And if you know anything about garlic, you plant it in the fall, and then it grows and you harvest it in the summer. Well, he had just gotten a call from his landlord, and his landlord said, yeah, I'm not renewing the lease. Sorry, don't come back. So that's $30,000 worth of money that he's got stuck there in the ground. He's calling me, Rachel, what does the law say? What do I do? So I'm thinking, I'm going to look it up. I'm sure I'll find something good, and we're going to fix this. Well, much to my surprise, I go and I look it up, and I discover the law is not the first source of the authority for what we're going to do in this situation. The first source of authority is whatever they agreed to do. What did this farmer guy and his landowner, what did they agree? They didn't agree. They didn't talk about it. And that, to me, was a really crystallizing moment in terms of what I was going to do for the farming community, how I was going to be of service. I realized that we are leaving power on the table. We are not taking the power that's available to us to right legal documents, business agreements, leases, operating agreements, contracts, all of that, that define our business, that shape our values, and that help us be stable and resilient over time. Too many farm businesses, too many sustainable farm businesses in particular, around the country are failing. Every year, the work is grueling and hard, and you don't make a lot of money, and then you're stuck with an unstable, unresilient situation because you don't know how to leverage the power that you have. So that's what Farm Commons does. We help put that power back in the hands of people.
Tell us a little bit more about the unique challenges, legal challenges that farmers face.
So in my world, it's not so much lawsuits. It's not that farmers are dealing with a lot of lawsuits or, regulatory, issues coming down. It really is about the day-to-day paperwork that affects a farm business and any small business every day. It's about, do I have security on this land? Is the customer actually going to buy my product when push comes to shove? It's about disputes between owners, because we all know that those are really the matters that take down so many family-owned and small businesses.
Okay. Sara Day, why don't you go next? Tell us what you do.
So I founded and run what we like to call a nature-based business accelerator. And that's based on businesses that respect and honor the wisdom of nature, which pretty much outsmarts us every time. And our vision is to see a more regenerative and inclusive economy, especially in the space of green spaces, which tend to be majority white folks, especially in agriculture. Regenerative is a set of land use practices that actually, used by farmers, sequesters carbon. And it's probably the fastest way that we can go about sequestering carbon, because clean energy is great. We absolutely need to go there, but we need to be sequestering holding as much carbon in the ground as we possibly can. We've already shot past that 350 ppm, so we need to keep it in the ground. And it's a growing movement. You're not hearing about it probably as much, but you're going to hear more and more about regenerative agriculture.
So remind us again how the businesses in your accelerator, which are mostly women-led, people of color-led, are working with farmers who are employing these regenerative practices.
Perfect. That's exactly it.
Is that what it is? They're mostly sourcing from these kinds of farmers?
Our strategy is to support the businesses that support the growers. It's challenging to get a farmer off the farm to go in and take a workshop. So our thinking is, if we can support those businesses and they can pay a premium to help those farmers use these land use practices, then we can exponentially affect farming. So, one of our businesses supports 20 farmers. I want to clarify, we're not just talking about food. We're actually talking about fiber farming and forest farming as well. Forest products, botanicals. Appalachia happens to be the most diverse food shed in North America. It's also one of the most biodiverse regions in the world. So we have an abundance there, which has actually also led to so much of the extraction. We've got trees, we've got coal, and so that's created a lot of challenges and pollution and poverty, and we're working to help restore that in Appalachia and actually beyond as well. So we're working with folks from outside the region.
Cool. Jeffrey, why don't you tell us what you do next? Loop closing. The hint is in the title of the organization, but you might also need to explain that to our audience.
Sure. It's actually appropriate you have me go last, because the last thing we want to do with our food is recycle it. We first want to reduce how much food waste we make, and then we want to reuse what we can. And that's a lot of who we partner with, but we focus on the recycle side of food. So what does that mean? Well, I guess I'll start with a perspective. It's ridiculous what we do with food waste. We haul it long distances, we put it into a hole in the ground in the landfill, and we create these devastating effects, which Sara Day was talking about, to the environment, our climate, but also to the communities that these landfills and these centralized composting facilities go next to. They have environmental justice issues, quality of life issues, and then we're not sustaining the soils for the farmers that Rachel is working with to have the land to continue to feed us. So you need to get that organic matter back into the ground. So that's our problem. And we don't have the capacity to compost the food waste. And in urban areas, which is where 80% of the population lives, we need those solutions. So that's where loop closing comes in. Mm-hmm. We get the food, we get the capacity for composting by shifting the paradigm from hauling the food waste to an industrial system to compost it, to be composted right on site. So right here in this building for the restaurant, instead of walking back to 3 or 4 dumpsters, you would walk back, get rid of one of the dumpsters, and have an in-vessel composting system back there. And then we would have staff that would operate that system, provide the technical knowledge that is needed for your staff to feed it. We do a turnkey solution for that, or help you do it yourselves. So that way, you are now empowered to compost that food waste. Those systems are paid from the cost savings of the hauling, because 80% or plus of the cost of moving food or waste is in the hauling part. So it pays for those systems, and it pays for local jobs. So instead of putting industrial systems next to communities, which are typically underrepresented communities and poorer communities, communities of color, now we're having systems that provides jobs, local jobs for people to run these systems.
So what happens once the composting is happening? Do you also take care of what happens to the compost?
Oh, this is the good part.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right here, look outside our door, you see asphalt and concrete. We're not putting compost back into the ground right here, especially all the food we make here.
Sure.
So the Feed the City, all these vehicles that these two are helping to fill up with produce for us to eat, come in full from a farm or distribution center. That full vehicle delivers the food and turns around and goes back empty now.
Everyone, like light bulbs just turned on across it. Everyone's like, oh, the trucks.
Yeah, they're already in use. Those vehicles are underutilized resource. And so those vehicles, we load the food, the finished compost onto those vehicles, take it back to the farms all in one trip, round trip. And it gets rid of 2 different fleets of vehicles if you try and compost it by hauling it to a facility and then hauling it from the composting facility to the farm.
Okay, so now that we know what the 3 of you are all about, let's zoom out a little bit, and I want any one of you, all of you, to really respond to this, which is, what are we talking about when we talk about food justice? What are the problems that we can identify, whether they're unique to this moment or not, in the system that you are all working to work towards and to cut away at?
Sure.
The food system is broken in many ways. Policy is a big part of it. Just like we have industry incentives for big industries, case in point, Amazon, but people are starting to push back on that. It's the same for agribusiness. And small farmers who are going to be better with the land typically, but we would do much better to have millions of small farms rather than 10,000 acres of corn, which is an extractive practice. Yet there are incentives for the agribusinesses and none for the small farmers. So this is why you have to, we're faced with paying a premium for healthy food from small farms, and that's unjust. It's unjust to the farmer who's making $10,000 a year, and it's unjust to folks not making $1 million or more. So that's policy. That's policy that has to change.
Anyone else? Problems in the system? Systemic problems that you've identified?
For Farm Commons, one of the core tenets of justice is that those that are most affected by a problem are those that should be driving the solution to the problem. For us, we don't see why that's any different when it comes to business law. Why shouldn't farmers who are experiencing problems with their leases and contracts be the ones who are the most empowered to create that change?
Right. So the thing with Farm Commons, even if you go to the website, there's so much material there. There's so many FAQs. There's so much and really specific. How do I weigh the pros and cons of entering into XYZ type of agreement? What's the deal with open sourcing all of that information?
Right.
It doesn't seem very lawyerly to me, at least.
I never thought I'd be a lawyer. Well, so we believe in people's capacity to understand this material, to evaluate it, and to make good decisions with the right support. We're not throwing farmers out there and being like, have fun figuring out how to do this. But we empower them. And empowerment, I think, implies that there is power that they already have, that they're now learning how to take, but also that there's a support structure in place. Attorneys are an invaluable resource, and I am one, and I definitely had to go that path to be able to provide this for my community. But we need skilled accountants, we need tax preparers, we need an ecosystem of support that helps farmers take that power that's available to them. The core point is that they themselves drive the articulation of the solutions. And too often we hand that over. We do hand that over to a form we downloaded from the internet just as much as we hand it over to an attorney.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk about sort of what's so intangible to so many people when we talk about things like this is that something like skipping out on plastic cutlery feels like a very, very tiny step toward, saving the planet or something really major like that. The disconnect, I think, can be really daunting for a lot of people. So can all of you talk about sort of the really high-level big goals that you think about in your daily practice, and then how your daily practice gets at accomplishing those big goals? And Sara Day, actually, when we spoke, you were saying that the big goal that you think about a lot is carbon in the soil.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that connects to your everyday?
Sure. And it just ties to what I was just speaking to with supporting a massive shift in incentives for small farmers. And there is a model. It's actually based on the tobacco. In the 30s, there was a young man whose name was John Berry, father to Wendell Berry, who's a well-known sustainable farming icon. He found that when they went to market with their tobacco, that it was worth nothing. And he went about becoming an attorney and remaining a farmer and establishing tobacco price supports, which tobacco farmers had for many years that ensured them a fair pay for their tobacco. Obviously, we've discovered that tobacco is killing us, and that has fallen by the wayside, but that same model can be applied to regenerative agriculture. And so the way we go about that is we support, again, businesses that are supporting multiple growers. 20, 40, we have a fiber mill. They're supporting 500 fiber farmers. We educate them around regenerative agriculture. We educate the businesses on regenerative practices, inclusive practices, equitable practices. They pass that along to their growers. So yes, we're working in the private sector, but I work also just personally in the policy sector to affect policy change, because they both have to happen. The great thing is we can hold out these great examples of incredible business. Okay, this scarf right here, one of our businesses, raises alpaca. She raised the alpaca, she spun the wool, she gave it to a neighboring farmer who grew the plants for the dye, the indigo, the goldenrod, and then sent it back to Alvina, who then knitted my scarf. And it was a closed loop, as it were.
Yeah. This is called Eat Your Values, but you're wearing your values.
I fall off the wagon occasionally. Craft beverages are also part of this, FYI.
Oh, talk about that a little bit more. That might interest this crowd.
Seriously, I'm from Kentucky, so obviously bourbon is very important to us. But drinking is an agricultural act. It's all grains. It's corn, barley, and wheat. And one of our companies is a malt company. And they're the only malt house in the Southeast, which is a critical component of bourbon and beer. They've grown astronomically, obviously, with the expansion of beer and with bourbon. Malt is an essential ingredient. The great thing about them is they are sourcing from local farmers, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Virginia. And actually, big industries are starting to do this as well. We're working some with Lush Cosmetics. We brought them to Appalachia so that they could source. They have actually really set the standard for a large industry sourcing from small growers. They intentionally choose small growers rather than raising 10,000 acres of lavender at their home base up in Canada. So I see it happening slowly but surely.
Rachel, what's your high-level problem? You talked about not seeing enough legal advice being provided for people in your community. Is that the highest level that you're operating at in terms of thinking of problem solving?
Well, we think of it, the communities don't necessarily need the advice provided to them. They need to engage themselves with what the solutions are.
Like you don't go in there and sit between two people at a table and try and negotiate terms of anything, do you?
Well, it might happen, but let's take let's take the example of carbon in the soil. I work with farmers that use cover crops. Cover crops keep the soil in place. They pull carbon back out into the soil. It's absolutely essential. Many of them are also operating on leased land.
Actually, can we pause there and explain carbon in the soil for people who aren't familiar with why regenerative farming is so crucial? Anyone who wants to jump. Jeffrey?
You were right on it. I'm like,
go ahead.
I think you should, because there's 4 basic sort of practices.
Cover cropping, not disturbing the soil. I'm losing my science background.
No-till, low-till.
Yeah.
Rotating crops.
Right.
Not growing the same thing.
And why is it so crucial to be keeping carbon from escaping the soil?
Greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
Climate change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if I can add some not closing, but an extra point. So we do the greenhouse gas emissions. We then compromise the climate patterns. So it's in the air. So we talked about things we can do to stop putting carbon into the air. But what you're asking about is putting it back into the soil. It pulls the carbon out of the atmosphere that's already there. So that's what she's talking about with the regenerative farming. This is what she's talking about with the cover crops. And then that's what I'm talking about when you put compost in the soil. It is a sequestering of the carbon out of the atmosphere. So it actually reverses the greenhouse gas emissions we've done in the past. So there's we've given some examples on the growing side. On the composting side, there's the Marin Carbon Project. And the Marin Carbon Project documented just how much carbon can be sequestered. So if you take, I don't know if you can see the distance there, it's maybe a quarter of an inch. If you put that on about half of the rangeland in California, it will pull all of the carbon emissions for the year out of the atmosphere from California's transportation industry. So it's something like 20% of the carbon. So we actually have an ability to reverse the harm we've done by sequestering in the ways we're talking about.
And one of the big numbers being tossed about is that if we globally can shift 10% of our agriculture to regenerative, then we can sequester all the carbon that we generate. Now,
I'm not saying what we should do, but it sounds
anyway,
a little bit
numbers.
dire.
Anyway, there's growing support and evidence for that.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're a farmer who wants to put in a cover crop, it costs you money, and that's not your land if you're leasing it, and so you're not getting any monetary benefit from doing that at all. How should these costs be allocated? I, as the attorney, don't have an answer for that. There are two people that have that answer, the farmer and the landowner. And in terms of, to get back to your question about the high-level change, what we need to do is create a space for that challenging conversation to be had, the challenging conversation about what is fair, who needs to pay for this, and to have it on a community level where farmers themselves are discussing what's fair, landowners. And so, to me, learning to have the harder conversations about our businesses and about sustainability and about who needs to pay for it, that's the real challenge. That's a big level goal.
One thing you told me, Rachel, is that you're very unlawyerly in the sense that you don't feel inclined to pin people down to a whole long list of terms. Like this discussion you're talking about, the difficult conversation that you're talking about, you don't necessarily recommend enacting it in legalese and signing at the bottom, right?
I'm fine with that. But what I'm about relationships.
Yeah. Okay.
Fundamentally, the business is going to rise and fall on its relationships, not on a signature at the bottom at the end of the document. That's about suing them, and the people I work with aren't going to sue anyone anyways. So if we don't have stable, resilient relationships in our community, we don't have a viable business. So I'm not going to insert myself as an attorney into that relationship and say, this is what you got to do. You know what you got to do. I'm here to support it.
Jeffrey, what about your high level? You didn't give us one.
Sure.
What's the big thing? What's the big thing in all caps that's at the top of your head every day?
Yeah, well, let's go out there. So who's seen the movie Interstellar, or at least knows the plot?
Ooh,
Yeah.
almost as many people who eat
Wow.
every day.
So
pretty
I
good.
actually, I'm going to reference something I haven't seen yet. So maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that the plot is we can't sustain life on Earth because our soil, part of it is the soils don't sustain life anymore. So we have to go to another planet and find
Was that
where we live.
Interstellar?
Does that sound right?
Okay.
All right, thank you. So, yeah, that's basically what we're up against. We are, if we don't get the organic matter and we don't regenerate our soils, we don't get the organic living matter back into the soils, we lose it. We've already lost a significant number of the soils. Studies give different numbers, but it's astonishing what we've lost so far. And we have this unsustainable practice of depleting soils and then moving to the next place. And what we need to replete it, we just put it in a landfill. So. Yeah, my big picture is, hey, I want us to stay on Earth and not have to do Interstellar. And then coming back down from there is how I get to, well, how do we do some actionable steps? And what I found was the other issue is we have this throwaway mentality, and there actually is a place called away. And away is typically, like I said earlier, next to the underrepresented communities, the communities, the poor communities, the communities of color, some rural communities. So we're exploiting parts of our community, our people, our us, at the expense of our bad habits and bad patterns. So, and it doesn't have to be that way. It's completely feasible to compost our food waste where we live, which then brings us back to a question you asked earlier about justice in the food system. So if we are all handling our food waste ourselves where we live, so in the affluent neighborhood as well as the poor neighborhood and all in between, we now have an equity system set in place that is fair for all of us and equitable for all of us. The nice, wonderful side benefit of that are two. One, we're not exploitive anymore of populations, but two, who in here lives in New York and sees the rats and the roaches and smells running around?
Every day.
Yeah, so
Everywhere.
back to some justice, we get some justice on those rats and roaches, and because if you compost your food waste, you actually mitigate those pressures where you live in the cities. In New York, we've done systems in D.C. and where
there's a misconception that composting is a messy and smelly and out there kind of process, but that's not the way that you've designed your system, right?
Yeah, that's the problem with radio is I can't show you photos of what we actually do.
We're Facebook live streaming too, so you know, be as demonstrative as you need.
Oh, well, let me reach in my phone and pull up that. No.
You know, I want to tag on just to say that something we haven't spoken to, maybe it's implied, is that regenerative agriculture, besides sequestering carbon, also restores the nutrition in our food. We've lost 70% of the nutrition over 70 years. You'd have to eat 8 oranges to get the nutrition that your grandmother did. So that's a really critical piece. It's also critical because regenerative agriculture helps retain water. So it's just a win-win-win.
I'm so glad you did say that, because even though it feels implied, I think people maybe don't. I heard a wow come from this side of the room, just wow, in terms of how much we've lost. Let's talk about our dying planet for a second, because that seems important. I'm thinking about a piece that I read really recently, and for the record, I feel like I've read a lot of pieces really recently, long form, you know, the world is dying, it's time to panic type pieces about climate change and the state of our planet. But I was most recently reading in the New York Times Sunday Review, David Wallace Wells was writing critically about suggestions like, well, why don't you just eat less meat if you care about the state of our planet, or buy an electric car? And he writes this: conscious consumption is a cop-out, a neoliberal diversion from collective action, which is what is necessary. People should try to live by their own values about climate, as with everything else, but the effects of individual lifestyle choices are ultimately trivial compared with what politics can achieve. React.
He's got a point.
I think this really ties into what you've been talking about.
You've got to do
Sara Day.
both.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he's got a point. I mean, really, industry is the biggest emitter, and we can make individual choices and we can seek to influence change within those industries, but with a stroke of a pen, you can literally shift and impact millions and millions of folks.
It's not enough to just go to the grocery store and try to find the right food, because the right food isn't there. If my people can't make a buck, can't make a living selling the food and producing it, then we're not going to be there, and that product won't be there either. We need to think more deeply about what are the systemic barriers that are preventing the market from functioning the way we think that it will, and it's not functioning the way we want it to when it comes to producing grass-fed beef or vegetables. There are few to no price supports of any kind or viable crop insurance for production of any vegetables. If you want to grow corn or soy to feed a cow, you're going to be fine. You want to grow broccoli? No. I'm not sure that's a system that we want to be setting up for folks.
Yeah, so on the policy side, there are ramifications. I would argue that both work. There are significant things we can do, but there are policy things we also need to do. And so from the food waste composting side of it, I talked about the haul away mentality that we have. And we have a very robust hauling infrastructure set up in the States. It's wonderful. I love that we benefit from it from all the time. So I don't want to get rid of that. I think we need to continue to have that. We need to have centralized composting facilities. But we also need to understand that to build that infrastructure, we've subsidized it. So there's tipping stations in New York City and Washington, D.C. that I know of, and other cities. They're subsidized. And we have, if you're having your trash picked up in Washington, D.C., your cost is on your property tax bill, but it's maybe a quarter or third of what it really is. It's subsidized. So we have all these subsidies that have been slipped into the system that we don't really appreciate and realize. And so we're not on equal playing ground when we want to compost our food waste, which doesn't have the subsidies, versus haul it to a landfill, which does have the subsidies. So yeah, there is a big benefit. If we make it an equal playing ground, then things will look differently.
Jeffrey, I have some bad news that I brought just for you, which is about New York's organics collection program here. I know you're based in D.C. right now, right?
I am.
Okay, so
but I'm familiar with New York. It
well,
does some great work.
So there's been some great work. However, recently the Department of Sanitation decided, and some of you may have seen this, you might have seen the little brown organics collection bins popping up in your neighborhood. It's been a pilot program that was rolled out progressively neighborhood by neighborhood. Well, the Sanitation Department has decided to halt expanding that program. There are still some neighborhoods that don't have it because of low participation rates. It showed that in 2017, there were just over 1 million tons of organic waste in New York City, and only 1.7% of it ended up getting recycled. Are those, contextualize that for us? Is that a really bad number? Because it sounds really bad.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we're back to that, but it's not even, that's less than the national average, 5% of what we recycle. So,
but
yeah,
what
that's
happens
really
when you
so,
it's like teaching a man to fish instead of giving him, right? Like we've given the men the composting bins.
Yeah.
And now what happens that they're not participating?
Yeah, how I look at that is it depends. I don't know the background of why they're doing it, and I don't know what their next steps are going to be. So if it's one of the situations where, hey, we have a problem, we don't have the participation we need, so let's figure it out and fix it, then that's good. You need to do that. You don't want to continue going forward with something that's not working. Yeah. You need to then do the changes you need to make it work. So I'm hoping that's what they're doing. And so I look at our problem from the long perspective, that it's not going to be we try something, it succeeds, and it's done. We're going to try something, it fails. We're going to try something else, it fails. We're going to try something else, it fails. That's how I ended up here. And then finally you get some successes along the way. And so, yeah, there's going to be all these failures that come up, like what appears to be a failure. I'm not really sure it is. So
that's a good way to put it. Appears to be a failure.
Yeah.
All of your organizations are doing something to sort of course correct a certain problem, it feels like. That's one way to put it, at least. What does the future of these problems look like? Do you think a lot about that? Any of you?
All the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, don't cry. This wasn't meant to be a cry question.
But
where
I
do-
vacillate
where do I
between
begin?
Pollyanna
Yeah,
and
where do I
nihilist.
begin?
I mean, it depends on the day. I'm like, oh, we can make the I mean, it was like Wendell Berry is actually a dear friend of mine, has influenced me a lot. And I was feeling pretty cynical a few years ago, and he sort of nicely held me by the arm, just the shoulders, and was like, Sara Day, times are too dire to be anything but hopeful. And that's just what I carry around in my head, and some days it's harder than others.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of obstacles. But I think one way I look at it is we're gonna, for a lot of these solutions, reach tipping points. So we're gonna do a lot of work. Like I said earlier, have a lot of failures along the way. We put a lot of effort in, and then it may be a year, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20. In which case I may be gone by then. But anyways, we may eventually get there. But it'll be like a tipping point where all the work then starts to come together, because there's a lot of different parts and pieces that we need to coordinate and pull together to make this work, and yeah, we can do it. So just keep going. And there's back to the New York thing, maybe what would help them to make sure they do it right is if people here speak up and say something about, no, we want this to happen, then that gives the political space for the decision makers to do the right thing. So if people don't speak up and say that they want this and they push for this, then people who have to make the decisions don't feel they have the space to make the right decision. So we got to give people that space.
Rachel, what is the future of farmers not knowing what power they're leaving on the table?
The future is sustainable farm businesses don't thrive. They don't make a living. They don't continue to do the incredible work that they have done. And then what we see is consolidation of land holdings. We see the emptying of rural areas. We see discontent in rural areas growing, which has real impacts for everyone. We see rural communities that aren't experiencing the justice that they are owed. But I don't think that that's the future that we will go down. There's tremendous hope in the young people of today who are looking at farming, who are looking at new ways of living on the land and experiencing that connection to rural areas. Many of the young people of today never grew up in farming at all, and they see things differently, and that's good. That's good. Sometimes these wild disruptions that we grow through as a society, or in sectors of our economy, that's just more opportunity. You crack the eggs, then you make the omelets.
I have a stat
Then
that's good
then
news
you
for you,
compost
Rachel.
them.
Sorry. And then you compost the shells. Exactly. That was the right way to land that. I have a good stat for you, Rachel, which is in 2015, a Nielsen study found that millennials are the most willing to pay more for a product if it comes from a sustainable brand.
Absolutely.
Millennials.
Even though they're the
Yeah.
poorest generation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, they give me a tremendous
actually,
amount
it's
of hope.
millennials that are helpful, because if you look at the values of millennials, demographic, I love demographic data. People under 35 and their values are completely flipped to those 55 and older around justice and about sustainability and
Impact. Millennials see impact. The impact of their actions, their choices. Not that other generations don't, by all means, but it's more baked into the millennial ecos. The ecosystem. Yeah.
So what does it really mean to eat your values? In a minute, we're going to ask everyone to take some notes. Everyone has paper and little golf pencils at your table. You can write down some concrete actions that you would like to commit to. But maybe you need some help coming up with ideas, which is why we have our panel here. Can any of you talk a little bit more about how much any of our actions on the consumption end can really move the needle?
well, sure. Go ahead.
Purchasing a food product directly from a farmer is an incredible act. It means a lot. It really does. And also endeavoring to learn more about the economic business model behind farming, to discover what does production look like for them. That's extremely important. That's where your food comes from. That's what you put in your body. And most farmers are really eager to help you see that. I forgot the question.
No, well, the question was, what can people do to move the needle on kind of big problems? But I guess also another question I have is the bottom line on the consumer end that maybe you just do need to spend more in order to support a better food system?
I think it's about relationships. Develop that relationship. You don't always have more money for more food, and maybe you've got enough. One of the biggest problems with CSA, if you're familiar, the weekly subscription of vegetables, people can't eat it all. Then they feel really guilty. So we don't always just need to acquire more, but to develop a deeper relationship with the people that we interact with the people that grow our food. And relationships are what make us whole as humans and help us express our values.
I would also add to that just to seek out Black farmer networks. They're all over the country. We in Kentucky, 3% of Kentuckians are farmers. Only 1% are Black farmers, and there's a lot of traumatic history with Black farmers. And but I like in North Carolina, they're completely taking cotton back, the Black Cotton Network. So I would like say, I mean, we're in New York, so I'm like, I don't know, what can New Yorkers
do here?
But you can, you can absolutely, I think, seek that out in New York. There have to be Black farmer networks around here.
Yeah. I would say wherever you're shopping, you ask at those grocery stores for the products that these two are helping people to produce, and you help pull it in. So I think it's simple. And that takes me, I'd say have an aha moment. It's a nice little acronym. So AHA. So first one is for me, I'm talking about food waste now. So think about your attitude towards food waste. If you see a banana peel or apple core, do you see it as just trash and something to throw away and it's of no value? Or do you see the value in it? What is your attitude towards that waste? And so if you change your attitude to appreciate something, then your behavior will have to follow. And then you'll start to find solutions. So if you want to start recycling your food and composting your food waste, you kind of already see it, but really hold on to that value. And then, like I said, solutions will start to reveal themselves. So another way, once those solutions come, you need to make them habits. So you can start small, like I did. I just wanted to compost my food waste for my home. And I lived in a city block without a blade of grass on it, so I wasn't throwing it in a pile like Grandpa's compost pile. I had to figure something out.
And you weren't involved in this line of work at all before this, right?
No.
Okay. You were just a person looking to compost.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't have any special expertise on composting in particular. I just saw the value of it and decided to make a habit of it. And then once I figured out how to compost with worms in my condo, it just started growing from there. And then, so you make habits one habit I would suggest is if you just start separating your food waste out and then you've got it set up, sometimes it's also part of, now you have it collecting. I'd say put it in your freezer, don't leave it out. And then you'll decide, I'm going to have to find a solution to this. And what I've heard from people in DC, I've set up community composting sites, and they'll come and start to use them, and they'll find out it was me who set it up, and I'll say, oh, thank you for creating this infrastructure. I've been wanting to do it, but it just wasn't available. But they just were out and about and found it and stumbled upon it. So if you just set yourself up to be aware of that, then you start to find these things. And another thing I'll add for making it a habit is, actually, I'm going to skip over. We're going to go to attitude. We're going to go to ask. And the last thing is for asking. So like I said, ask the grocery store folks here for that, but also ask your restaurants and grocers to compost. Ask your apartment complex to compost. And if you start doing that, you'll start to build a momentum for it. And the last is, you'd mentioned have those hard conversations with people. Have them about the food, have them about the food waste, have those hard conversations, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, or whether it's a service provider for you.
And you can ask your legislators
The
to
policy side.
you can follow the Farm Bill. It's become this huge, massive omnibus bill, and food stamps are part of that, and so it's gotten really divisive because well, you know why. Some folks want to just cut that program. That being said, you can talk to your legislator about incentives for sustainable farmers.
Real quick on the
It's
Green
only
New
fair.
Deal.
Yes.
what's the talk in sustainable agriculture land about what's being proposed in the Green New Deal?
I'm fortunate because a young woman that's been working with us is actually one of the original young folks that started growing the Sunrise Movement, and that's who AOC has, they're working with them and just as Democrats. So it's a resolution. It's not a bill. It's there to be influenced, and so we're working to get more of that understanding of regenerative agriculture into the Green New Deal, and you can too.
Okay, friends, the time has come. I gave you many warnings that this was going to happen here at the end. I want you to reflect on everything that you've heard, everything that we've talked about up here, and maybe even talk to some of the people around you that you didn't come here with. Just say, hi, I'm me. Here are a couple of things that I'm committing to that I would like to work toward. No one is going to follow up with you and give you a bad grade if you don't do these things, so be aspirational about these, but also make them as realistic as you can. Little things that you would like to undertake to lessen your negative impact on the world around us. I'm going to give you a couple minutes, and then I'm going to call on some of you if you elect to be called on. So take a few minutes, chat, we'll come back and wrap up the night.
Guy.
No, guys, all the hard questions come at the end.
They're going to start calling us out.
Good. Then it gets fun.
Yeah. All the questions I didn't tell you. What happened at the end. I don't feel like. Yeah, we'll give you a whole. We'll just blow out the last hour. I know the answer.
I'd like to give a shout out. And then sometimes I talk about just that day along the way. I don't know if there's really a place for that.
There may not be a place for that, but she also You're like, I'm good. Yeah. I could stay here. Tell everyone about Melba. I have so many more questions based on just hearing that.
Yeah. She was in she moved back. Well, I was about 15 years ago to be close to her parents. Kentucky had and it's a phenomenon. People either don't leave or they come back. 3/4 of the state was gone. And so they either it's just like there's something about I just thought about anything.
Okay, everybody, wrap up your conversations. We're going to rejoin as a group. I'm glad to see everyone's chit-chatting. Does anyone want to volunteer to share some of the action items that they wrote down for what they would like to do? And if no one would like to share, then I'm going to start calling on people. Ha ha ha. Yes, right here in the front.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a brown bin and I don't use it.
Confessions.
True confessions.
Confessions of an organics non-composter. So what is your resolution?
To use it, I was just saying, I didn't realize it was that bad, and that my action was sort of leading to the potential for it to not be rolled out. And so that feels horrific to me. And the idea of putting it in my freezer is like a game changer for me.
Nice.
Because truly I was like, I'm going to go outside. But the idea that I could just like put it in for the week in the freezer and it's not going to stink up. And at the end of the week, I can put it in the compost. It seems so much more doable and something I can commit to.
All
And if you're lazy
right.
like me and forget it 2 or 3 weeks, it's still okay.
Yeah.
Okay, composting. Great. Love it. We have an answer on this side.
Hello.
Hello.
Firstly, I want to congratulate all your speakers on doing really amazing work to pretty much save our planet. And thank you to NYC for bringing it to us. The one thing I wanted to say about composting, and that's very interesting, is that I think the biggest weakness of New York's composting program was that brown bins landed on people's doorsteps without any education, without any marketing campaign, without any idea of why you're doing this, and then you just expect people to kind of have rotting food in their backyard. No attempt to change behavior, and that's a real problem, and the city should be accountable for that. The second thing I wanted to say as well, so compost, definitely, is that everything that's been spoken about tonight is very much about the supply side of food, which is really, really important. But as I'm sure all your speakers understand, without the demand side, without enough people ready to spend money to buy good, sustainable food, the model doesn't work. We can't just have rich people eating good food. There's not enough of that. And so I want to name check the Park Slope Food Co-op, which is a co-op in Brooklyn of 17,000 members. It has $50-odd million in turnover, which is the highest turnover for a grocery store per square foot in the country. I don't know why there aren't more in New York City, but I think people need to start thinking about collective action in terms of buying power and the ability to band together to buy good food. So I'm going to commit to thinking more about that.
Thank you. Thank you, and very good point. Is anyone else a member of the Park Slope Food Co-op here in this room? Just curious. Yep. One tentative hand. Why don't you wait for a mic? A mic is on its way.
I'm not, but my friend is, who I'm staying with. And so one of the little things I wrote down, it always baffles me, and this is just a confusing problem to me when positive change is happening in one kind of category of a challenge, so the cooperative business model, and yet I noticed so much plastic waste, just the way that food is purchased from that particular store. So I think I will finally ask next time I go with my friend why they sell in the ways that they do, and just really so many different plastic bags. But I just wanted to say that because it was that exact co-op.
I just want to confirm, you're absolutely on point about cooperatively owned groceries, cooperatively owned businesses, cooperatively owned real estate is how we push back against extreme wealth, gentrification, isolation. So, you're here.
Anyone else have an action item they'd like to share? I have someone in the back. Ooh, everyone's participation's going up. We're doing better than the organics compost program here. Sorry, bad joke. It's really dire, folks. It's not great. Not a good situation. Go ahead.
I actually have a question. We know about subsidies from Monsanto, and I mean for big agriculture, but are there subsidies for sustainable farmers, or are there conversations around, I think you mentioned it briefly, but very briefly, just wonder if you have more detail on what's available to sustainable farmers.
So the USDA has like small grants for equipment and for farmers markets, and there are things like double dollars, which basically for low income folks, your dollar will buy twice the produce, but it's not enough. Okay, so that pales in comparison to the millions and billions of dollars, billions and billions of dollars that the large industrial ag community receives. And I don't mean to diminish those efforts, but it's not enough, which is why food is so expensive and farmers are barely making a living.
Not only is it not subsidized, you are penalized, actually, under programs for growing fresh fruits and vegetables. If you participate in some commodity programs on thousands of acres and you take 1, 2, 3, 4 acres to grow vegetables, you'll lose your subsidies. So you're actually punished.
Would anyone else like to share any goals, action points? Yeah, here in the front.
I just wanted to say, if you are interested in starting to compost or drop off your food scraps and you don't have a brown bin in your building, there is an excellent map on it is a map on the nyc.gov website /compost. So nyc.gov/compost. There's pickup sites.
Oh, the pickup sites.
All over the city, hundreds of them, whether it's or drop-off sites, I should say. Either it's WNYC, it's community gardeners, there's lots of bins you can drop things off at. Sometimes they're staffed, sometimes they're not, but there are definitely options.
This is a compost crowd. These are the few people who are composting.
There are 200 plus of those. Great plug.
Another comment on this side.
No, I wrote to compost on Thanksgiving, but I think bigger picture on days.
You don't like turkey leftovers?
No, like on days where there's like a lot of food
Excessive,
and family,
yeah.
you should think about the supply chain from purchase to disposal.
Yeah, great. Well, let's leave it there. I'm sure that everyone has lots of ideas. If you would like to share your ideas more broadly with more people in the room, and sometimes it can be a little bit encouraging when you see what other people have also laid out for themselves, tweet it. We have a hashtag. It's Change Every Day. That's up on some of the screens around the room. It's all one word, hashtag Change Every Day. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight. Thank you all for coming out tonight. This has been Change Every Day. Eat your values. Please give them a big round of applause.
Can we do that call to action? That call to action thing?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Is it too late for that?
Oh, no, not at all. No, would you like to all mention how to find your organizations and any other parting advice you have?
I'm totally going to take advantage of this because our applications are open until March the 18th, and we do accept applications from across the country. About 25% of our businesses are from other places. We had one from Brooklyn a couple of years ago. So I just want to say, hey, if you know a great business in sustainable food, clothing, green building, wellness products, at acceleratingappalachia.org.
Great. Rachel, how do we find you?
Especially if you're a farmer or if you're an attorney who's interested in our model, farmcommons.org or rachel@farmcommons.org.
Yeah, and then if you want help with your business or organization to compost, it's loopclosing.com. Hit us up there. That's what we do. And if you want to do your own composting, we'll help you as well, but there's other resources you can grab online. The Institute for Local Self-Reliance, ilsr.org, has a tremendous wealth of resources there. And if you want to build your own worm bin in your own place and get started like I did, you go to North Carolina State University. Rhonda Sherman has a kind of a 3-pager, 4-pager, how to do it to get started. There's some lessons learned to learn from that, so feel free to hit me up and I'll share those with you as well.
One more big round of applause for our panelists, Jeffrey Neal from Loop Closing, Rachel Armstrong from Farm Commons, and Sara Day Evans from Accelerating Appalachia. This is the Greene Space. I'm Shumita Basu. Good night, and I hope to see you at the next Change Every Day event, which is next week. Thank you very much.